At 74 years old, she thought her love story was over. Her husband had been gone for 8 years. Her children had their own lives. And the quiet in her home had become something she no longer questioned. But one rainy evening, a stranger knocked on her door. And in his hands was a small wooden box filled with letters. Letters she had never received. Letters written by the one man she had loved before everything else. Her first love. A man she believed had forgotten her. For more than 50 years. What she was about to discover would change everything she thought she knew about her past. And reveal a love that never truly ended. This is the story of the night she met her first love again. The rain began just before dusk, drifting down in thin, silver lines that blurred the edges of the world outside. It wasn't the kind of rain that demanded attention. There was no thunder, no sudden rush of wind, no urgency. Just a quiet, steady falling, like time itself. At 74, Eleanor Whitmore had come to appreciate that kind of rain. It asked nothing of her. It didn't expect her to move faster, speak louder, or feel more than she already did. It simply accompanied her. She sat in her usual chair by the window. The same worn armchair she had claimed as her own after Thomas passed away. The fabric had faded slightly over the years, softened by use, shaped by routine. A pale blue shawl rested over her shoulders, loosely wrapped but familiar, like an old habit she no longer questioned. In her hands, she held a porcelain teacup. The tea had gone cold. She didn't seem to notice. Or perhaps she did, and simply didn't mind anymore. The house was quiet. Not the peaceful quiet of a restful afternoon. But the deeper kind. The kind that comes after a life has already happened. A clock ticked steadily in the hallway, marking time with unwavering precision. The wooden floor shifted faintly under its own weight, letting out the occasional soft creak. These were the sounds Eleanor had grown used to. They filled the space where voices used to be, where laughter used to echo, where life once unfolded, day by day, without her ever imagining that one day it would all stop. People often told her she had lived a good life, a full life, a meaningful life, and she never argued with them. Because in many ways, it was true. She had married young, 23. Just old enough to feel certain about something as uncertain as love. Thomas Whitmore had been a good man. Not extraordinary. Not poetic. Not the kind of man who swept a woman off her feet with grand gestures or passionate declarations. But he was steady, reliable, kind in a quiet, consistent way. He remembered things. Not anniversaries in a dramatic sense, but small things. How she liked her tea. Which books she reread every winter. The way she grew quiet when something was bothering her. He noticed. And he stayed. For 43 years, he stayed. Eleanor had not been in love with Thomas the way she had once been in love at 17. That kind of love had been something else entirely. Something brighter, sharper, almost overwhelming. But what she shared with Thomas was different. It was built slowly, layer by layer. Like a house that becomes stronger not because it is perfect, but because it endures. They raised 2 children together. A daughter first, then a son 3 years later. The house filled with noise again, footsteps, arguments, laughter, doors opening and closing. Life moved forward the way it always does. Relentlessly. Without pausing to ask whether you're ready. Eleanor worked as a librarian at the local school. It suited her. Books had always made sense to her in a way people sometimes didn't. Stories had structure. A beginning. A middle. An end. Even when things went wrong, there was a reason. A purpose. A conclusion. Real life rarely offered that kind of clarity. Thomas passed away on a quiet autumn night. There had been no warning. No long illness. No final conversation filled with meaningful words. He had simply gone to bed. And never woken up. Peaceful, people said. He went peacefully. Eleanor had nodded when they told her that. She had even repeated it herself a few times. But privately, she wondered. Peaceful for whom? Because there was nothing peaceful about waking up to silence where a life had once been. Nothing peaceful about reaching across the bed and finding only cold sheets. Nothing peaceful about realizing that all the small, ordinary moments you had taken for granted were now gone forever. 8 years had passed since then. 8 long, quiet years. The children had their own lives now. Visits became occasional. Phone calls became shorter. Not out of neglect. But because that is what life does. It pulls people forward. Even when others are left behind. Eleanor had adapted. Humans always do. She developed routines. Morning tea by the window. A short walk when the weather allowed. Reading in the afternoons. Simple meals. Early evenings. It was not a sad life. But it was a smaller one. Contained. Carefully folded in on itself. Like a letter that had already been read too many times. She lifted her teacup again and took a small sip. Cold. She smiled faintly. Of course, she whispered. Even now, she sometimes made 2 cups. Out of habit. Or memory. Or something she didn't feel the need to define. Outside, the rain deepened slightly, tapping more insistently against the glass. A car passed slowly along the wet road, its tires hissing softly. And then, without warning, the past returned. She was 17 again. The air smelled different back then. Salt and sunlight. Possibility. Everything felt larger at 17. The sky stretched further. The future seemed endless. And emotions, especially love, were not something you managed carefully. They were something you fell into. Completely. Without hesitation. His name was Daniel Hayes. And even now, after more than 5 decades, the name lived quietly inside her. Unfaded. Unresolved. They met in the summer of 1969. A small coastal town. The same one her family visited every year. It had always been predictable, comforting, safe. Until that summer. She saw him before he spoke to her, leaning against a wooden fence near the edge of the beach. The wind moved through his dark hair, and the late afternoon sun caught it just enough to make it glow. He wasn't doing anything remarkable. Just standing there, watching the ocean. But when she walked past, he looked at her. Not briefly, not casually, but with a kind of quiet attention that made her aware of herself in a way she hadn't been before. "You're not from around here," he said. She stopped, turned, raised an eyebrow slightly. "Is it that obvious?" He smiled. "Only because I would have remembered you." That should have been enough to make her walk away. Too forward. Too confident. Too certain. And yet, she didn't. That was the beginning. Not dramatic. Not extraordinary. Just a conversation. Followed by another. And then another. They began to see each other every day. At first by coincidence. Then by intention. They walked along the shoreline, letting the waves drift over their feet. They talked about music, books, dreams. About the future, though neither of them truly understood what that meant yet. Daniel listened in a way that made her feel visible. Not just seen, but understood. As if her thoughts mattered. As if she mattered. For a girl who had spent most of her life being quiet. Careful, unnoticed. That kind of attention was powerful. By midsummer, they were inseparable. They shared small moments that felt enormous at the time. Ice cream melting too quickly in the heat. Laughter that came too easily. Silences that didn't feel awkward. Just full. The first time he held her hand, she felt it everywhere. Not just in her fingers, but in her chest. Her breath. Her thoughts. And when he kissed her for the first time. Soft. Careful. As if asking a question. The world seemed to pause. Eleanor shifted slightly in her chair. Her eyes softened. Even now, she could remember exactly how it felt. They fell in love slowly. And then all at once. But time doesn't stop. Even when you want it to. Summer ended. On their last evening, they sat together on the beach. The sky was painted in soft gold and fading violet. Neither of them wanted to say what they were both thinking. "I don't want this to end," Eleanor said finally. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. Then, "It doesn't have to." They made promises. The kind young people always believe they can keep. Letters. Visits. A future that somehow stretched across distance. And for a while, it worked. The letters came. Long. Carefully written. Full of everything they couldn't say in person. She waited for them. Lived for them. Until one day, they stopped. No explanation. No goodbye. Just silence. She wrote again. And again. And again. But nothing came back. Eventually, she stopped. Not because she had stopped caring. But because hope, when unanswered for too long, becomes something fragile. Something that hurts to hold on to. Eleanor blinked. Back in the present. The rain continued. Steady. Unrelenting. A knock at the door startled her. Sharp. Unexpected. She stood slowly and walked down the hallway. Coming, she called. When she opened the door, a young man stood there, holding a small wooden box. Mrs. Whitmore? Yes? My name is Lucas Hayes. The name echoed. My grandfather knew you, he said. A pause. Then, Daniel Hayes. Everything inside her stilled. I think these belong to you, he said, holding out the box. Letters, he added. Letters he wrote. I never received them, she whispered. I know, Lucas said gently. He never sent them. They sat in silence. The box between them. Heavy. With everything that had never been said. Eleanor reached for it. Her fingers trembling. And then. She stopped. Because she understood something completely. Suddenly. And deeply. If she opened it, she would have to face everything she had spent a lifetime quietly carrying. Outside, the rain continued to fall. Soft. Endless. Like memory. For a long time, Eleanor did not move. The box sat in front of her on the small wooden table. Its surface worn smooth by time. Its edges softened like something that had been held often, but never opened. Lucas sat quietly across from her. He didn't rush her. Didn't speak. There was a kind of understanding in his stillness. As if he knew this moment did not belong to him. It belonged to her. And to the past. Eleanor reached out slowly. Her fingers hovered just above the lid. Trembling, not from age. But from something deeper. Something she hadn't felt in decades. Fear. Not of what was inside. But of what it might awaken. I don't know if I should open it, she said softly. Lucas nodded. That's okay, he replied. You don't have to, not today. But she knew that wasn't true. Because the moment the box had entered her home, the past had already followed. She exhaled slowly. Then, with a quiet, deliberate motion, she lifted the lid. The smell came first. Old paper. Faintly sweet. Faintly dusted with time. The scent of something preserved. Something that had waited. Inside were letters. Dozens of them. Carefully stacked. Each one addressed in handwriting she recognized instantly. Even after all these years. Her name. Written the way he used to write it. Not Eleanor. But Ellie. Her throat tightened. She picked up the first envelope. The paper felt fragile, but intact. The postmark area was blank. No stamp. No date. Just intention, never fulfilled. Her fingers hesitated. Then slowly. She opened it. The paper unfolded with a soft, almost reverent sound. And there it was. His voice. After more than 50 years. Ellie. I don't know if this letter will ever reach you. I've written so many already. And I haven't sent any of them. I keep telling myself I will, tomorrow. Next week, when things make more sense. But things don't seem to be making sense anymore. Eleanor's breath caught. Her eyes moved slowly across the page, absorbing each word as if it might disappear if she read too quickly. I think about you every day. Not in a dramatic way. Not in a way that interrupts everything else. But in the quiet moments. When I'm walking to class. When I hear a song you would have liked. When the sky looks the way it did that last night on the beach. A tear slipped down her cheek before she even realized it. Lucas looked away gently, giving her space. She turned to the next letter. Ellie. Something happened. And I don't know how to explain it without it sounding like an excuse. My father got sick. Suddenly. Worse than we thought. I had to come home. Everything changed very quickly. Her hands tightened slightly around the paper. I wanted to write you sooner. I should have. But every time I tried, the words felt insufficient. Like nothing I said would make sense of the distance growing between us. Eleanor closed her eyes briefly. A quiet ache settled in her chest. She reached for another letter. Then another. Time seemed to dissolve. The rain outside continued, steady and soft. The clock ticked somewhere in the background. But inside that room, there was only the past. Letter after letter unfolded a story she had never known. Daniel's father had fallen seriously ill. Cancer. Aggressive. Unpredictable. Daniel had left school to help his family. The days became filled with hospital visits. Long drives. Quiet waiting rooms that smelled faintly of antiseptic and stale coffee. Ellie. I keep meaning to send these. But every day feels like something I have to survive first. And by the time the day ends, I don't know how to reach you anymore. Eleanor pressed the paper gently to her chest. She could see it now. The life he had been pulled into. The weight he had been carrying. And suddenly, the silence all those years ago didn't feel like abandonment anymore. It felt like interruption. Another letter. Ellie. I got your last letter. I read it 3 times. You asked if I was still there. I am. I just don't know how to be the person you deserve right now. Her breathing grew uneven. I thought he forgot, she whispered. Lucas shook his head softly. He didn't. Eleanor continued reading. The letters grew shorter over time. Not because he cared less, but because life demanded more of him. Then, one letter, different from the others. The handwriting was slightly unsteady. Ellie. He's gone. I don't know what to do with the quiet. It feels like the world just kept going without asking if I was ready. Eleanor covered her mouth. The words felt painfully familiar. She had felt that same quiet. Years later. In a different house. With a different man. Another letter. Ellie. I almost sent all of these today. I had them in my hand. Walked all the way to the post office. But I stopped. Her heart tightened. Because I realized something. You've probably moved on. You deserve to. And I don't know if reopening something from so long ago would be fair to you." The room felt smaller. "So I'm keeping them. Not because I don't care. But because I care enough not to disrupt whatever life you've built." Eleanor's hands began to shake. All this time, she whispered. She had believed she had been forgotten. But he had remembered. Quietly. Faithfully. From a distance. At the bottom of the box. There was one final letter. Different. Newer. The paper less aged. Lucas leaned forward slightly. "That one," he said softly, "was written last year." Eleanor looked at him. Then slowly. She opened it. "Ellie. I don't know if you're still out there. But I've been thinking about you more lately. Maybe that's what happens when time starts to feel shorter." Her eyes blurred with tears. "I never stopped wondering what would have happened if I had just sent those letters. If I had been braver. If I had trusted that love doesn't disappear just because life gets complicated." Eleanor's breath trembled. "If by some chance this ever finds you, I'd like to see you again. Just once. Not to change anything. Not to rewrite the past. Just to sit across from you and know that you were real." Silence filled the room. "Did he?" Eleanor's voice faltered. Lucas nodded gently. He waited. Her heart tightened. "For how long?" Lucas hesitated. "A few months," he said. He wasn't very well toward the end. The words settled heavily. Eleanor looked down at the letter again. At the handwriting. At the space between words. At the life that had existed parallel to hers. For decades. "I wish I had known," she whispered. Lucas leaned forward slightly. "There's something else," he said. Eleanor looked up. "He used to go to the same place every Sunday morning," Lucas said. "A small church by the lake." Her breath caught. He said it reminded him of somewhere he used to sit with someone, a long time ago. Eleanor closed her eyes. The lake. The quiet. The stillness. "I can take you there," Lucas added gently. For a moment, she didn't respond. Because something inside her had shifted. Not dramatically. Not all at once. But enough. Enough to understand that this wasn't about the past anymore. It was about something unfinished. Something that had waited patiently. For decades. Eleanor folded the last letter carefully. Placed it back in the box. Then closed the lid. Her hands rested on top of it for a long moment. "I'd like that," she said finally. Lucas smiled softly. Outside, the rain had begun to slow. By morning, the sky was clear. The drive to the lake was quiet. Long stretches of road lined with tall trees. Their branches just beginning to hint at autumn. Golden light filtered through the leaves. The kind of light that made everything feel softer. More forgiving. When they arrived, Eleanor stepped out slowly. The air was crisp. Fresh. Carrying the faint scent of water and earth. The church was small. White. Simple. The kind of place that had stood for generations without needing to change. Beside it, the lake. Still. Endless. Eleanor walked slowly toward the water. Each step deliberate. Grounded. Lucas stayed behind, giving her space. She reached the edge. Looked out across the surface. And for a moment, she was 17 again. The same feeling. The same quiet. The same sense that something important had once happened here. She sat down on a wooden bench. The kind that had likely been there for years. Her hands rested in her lap. "I came," she said softly. The words disappeared into the open air. But somehow, they didn't feel lost. Because for the first time in decades, nothing felt unfinished anymore. Not everything in life is meant to be completed in the way we expect. Not every love story ends with two people together. But that doesn't make it any less real. Eleanor sat there for a long time, watching the light shift across the water, feeling something inside her settle. Not sadness, not regret, but peace. A quiet, gentle kind of peace. The kind that doesn't erase the past, but finally makes room for it. And as she sat there, with the letters resting safely in her bag, she realized something she hadn't understood before. Some loves don't end. They simply change form. And sometimes, after a lifetime, they find their way back. And maybe, that's what love truly is. Not something that always stays, but something that never really leaves. If this story touched you, if it reminded you of someone you once loved, or someone you never quite forgot, you're not alone. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, stories that stay with you long after they end, you're always welcome here. Just gently subscribe and stay a while. Because sometimes, the stories we need the most are the ones that feel like they were written just for us.